When I saw my daughter come to my room in the hospital, I was truly shocked. It was quite a long way from our house to this hospital. She's only 5 years old, and this girl has come this far all by herself? Mom! Saying so, she ran up to me. I hugged her with all my strength. She must have been feeling very anxious. I was so glad she didn't get in any accidents. I felt relieved, but at the same time, I felt a fierce anger welling up in my heart. What is he doing, leaving our precious only daughter alone? When I asked her about my husband, she told a horrifying story. Daddy is... The moment I heard that, I was disappointed in him. And I made a big decision about how I was going to live. My name is Maddie. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a sales clerk in a trading company. I have been married for about 6 years now. I met my husband Mark through his boss. Maddie, have you ever fished? It's fun. Would you like to go with me sometime? He loved fishing and took me to the ocean and river every week when we were dating. He was someone who always gave me new experiences, even though I was more of an indoor person. I happily accepted his proposal and gave birth to a daughter the year after we married. Everything was going well in my life at that time. I was so happy. However, after our daughter Sophie was born, his attitude gradually changed. I would say that he has become terribly cold toward me and my daughter. His attitude was as if to say, there's nothing more for me to do. I'm going to do whatever I want to do for the rest of my life, or something. Perhaps the dating period with him was too short. I was totally unaware of it. My husband was the type of man who'd never feed a fish he'd already caught. He didn't want to take care of our daughter in the slightest. When Sophie started crying while I was occupied with other chores, he completely ignored her. He sat on the couch, flipping through the pages of a fishing magazine, occasionally flicking his tongue. That baby was definitely his child, and yet he didn't try to love her one bit. Hey Mark, you should interact with Sophie a little bit more. Also, you know how to change her diaper and bathe her, right? By the way, she's going to start eating baby food soon, so you should also learn how to make it. I told him, because I wanted him to be involved with our daughter as much as possible. Even if he thinks I'm nagging, I don't care because my daughter was my priority. Oh, shut up. Why don't you take care of her? I'm tired from work. But contrary to my wishes, he only argued back. He didn't even try to listen to me. If something happened to me, he would have to take care of our daughter. I was talking to him in case of such an emergency, but he didn't listen to me. The next thing I knew, he began to avoid me and our daughter, and became more and more devoted to his hobby, fishing. Eventually, Sophie started to walk and talk. The way she hugged me with her small body seemed as lovely as an angel. But he was the same as ever, seemingly incapable of such feelings and constantly ignoring his daughter. Hey, Daddy! Daddy! When Sophie tried to talk to him, he didn't respond much, just gave her a blank answer and brushed her off lamely. I felt so bad for my daughter. The only time she will hold your hand or beg you for a cuddle is when she's little. It's too late to regret later that you should have been more involved back then. I didn't give up and tried to tell him so many times, hoping that somehow he would be interested in our daughter. It's fine, I'm a guy, so it's only natural that I don't know how to interact with a little girl. I leave everything to you, so just raise her the way you like. Don't talk to me, you're annoying. No matter what I did, nothing got through to him. His words represented the total abandonment of his responsibilities as a parent. I was dismayed and saddened by him when I heard it. Even a small child can at least tell if they are loved or not. Sophie gradually began to avoid him. I think she has come to recognize that that is what he is. With each passing day, an irrevocable distance grew between him and her. Our family relationship has become far from the ideal I had envisioned. Months passed, and my daughter turned 5 years old. It was a winter day. That morning, I was busy getting ready as usual, dropped my daughter off at daycare, and then headed off to work. I was almost at the office when I suddenly felt a strong dizziness. I couldn't hold back and fell to my knees right there, and I don't remember what happened next. I found myself lying in a hospital bed. The doctor diagnosed that I had a stroke. I was told that my symptoms were relatively mild, but I was to remain in the hospital for some time to be treated with medications and such. I couldn't help but sigh. What I had feared had happened. I called my husband and explained that I had fallen ill and had to be hospitalized. A few hours later, my husband arrived at the hospital with Sophie. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, sorry to worry you, but it wasn't that serious," I heard. I gave him a note with information on what to do to look after Sophie. It is, so to speak, a parenting manual dedicated to her. I thought I had written down the information in such detail that it would be all right as long as he had this. He then called Sophie to my bedside, hugged her tightly, and explained that I would not be able to live with her for a while. "Mom will be home as soon as I get better. You wait with Daddy, okay? You have to listen to Daddy while Mommy is away. You have to be a good girl." "Okay." I couldn't help but feel uneasy, so I repeatedly gave him cautions and advice. He said, okay, and took Sophie home. It was one afternoon, a few days after I had been hospitalized. My husband burst into my hospital room with a look of panic on his face. "Sophie is gone." My husband's face looked more anxious than I had ever seen. When I told him to explain how long she had been gone, he clammed up and said it was since the evening before yesterday. "The day before yesterday? You mean you haven't seen her for almost 2 whole days? And you've come to tell me that now?" "That's because, I've been looking for it everywhere in my own way." "Did you call the police?" "No, I have not called the police. I didn't want to make a big deal of it." "What were you thinking? Not knowing where your 5-year-old daughter went, even if it was only for an hour or so, is a huge deal." In response to my harsh words, he just remained looking down and repeated vague replies. There's no point in talking to him. I don't expect this man to be responsible as a father at all. I was completely disgusted with him. "Sophie will not come back to you anymore." I told him so. "Huh? What do you mean? Do you know something I don't?" I knew my daughter was not home before my husband told me. "Did you know Sophie came all the way here alone? Can you imagine my shock when the nurse told me, 'Your daughter is here at the reception desk all by herself'? It's very far from our house to this hospital. Despite that, my only 5-year-old daughter came to see me alone." "Mom!" I hugged her with all my strength as she ran up to me, looking so happy. She must have been feeling very anxious. I'm so glad she didn't get in any accidents. I felt relieved, but at the same time I felt a fierce anger welling up in my heart. What in the world is my husband doing? "Daddy is not with you?" When I asked her that, she told a horrifying story. Daddy went fishing. I asked him what about my meal, and he said just eat bread or something. My husband had gone fishing, leaving our daughter behind." I lost my words when I heard the story. And he said, "Just eat bread or something?" It was unbearable to think of how she felt to be left at home like that by her own father. What a terrible man. It always felt that he was not a very loving person, but I never thought it would be to this extent. I then contacted my parents, whom I had been hesitant to turn to because they live far away. I then explained the situation to them in detail and asked them to keep my daughter. After Sophie left with them, I was waiting to hear from you. I didn't think it would be 2 days later. Frankly, I'm more than disgusted. I'm more disappointed in you from the bottom of my heart. I didn't contact him from me, even after I had the situation figured out. I didn't feel like contacting him, and I wanted to know what he would do. "What? You knew all about this and you didn't tell me? If you knew, you should have told me." His tone became stronger, perhaps because he realized his daughter was not lost. That attitude irritated me even more. I wanted to know how you would excuse yourself, what lies you would tell, whether you would be honest with me about everything, and I wanted to know how you would react. He said he had searched everywhere in his own way. I can't believe he spent 2 days. If he really cared about his daughter, he should have called the police without hesitation. But he put his own self-preservation ahead of his daughter's safety. So he probably searched around alone without telling anyone. He was probably afraid of being held accountable as a parent. He probably thought that if he found her herself, he could pretend that nothing had happened. My patience with my husband's behavior, which was so irresponsible, had long since run out. Let me be clear. You don't deserve to be her father. Don't bother Sophie and me anymore. I want to divorce you. Isn't that nice? You can now go fishing without a care in the world. So you're happy, right? Whatever he said, I said this knowing that I had already made up my mind. I can't imagine being with him any longer. When he heard this, he turned pale and sweaty in an instant. Maddie, don't say that. I'm really sorry about this. Really, I'll make sure this never happens again. I'd never seen him like this before. He looked frightened and like he was about to cry. But seeing him like that did not move me in the least. It is too late to apologize now. My feelings for you have gone cold. After I was discharged from the hospital, I officially got a divorce from him by mutual consent. Anyone can start a rumor, but none can stop one. The story of my husband leaving his child to go fishing soon spread around, because it was much talked about amongst my neighbors and the people who worked at the hospital where I was staying. Soon, word spread throughout his office, and he began to receive cold stares from his coworkers, and many people knew that he had gotten divorced. He ended up destroying the integrity of his relationship with his boss, who had been a great help in getting him and I together. His position in the workplace became extremely uncomfortable, and his work was apparently not going well. Many of his colleagues have distanced themselves from him. No one wants to be close to a man who puts his hobbies before his children. I guess everyone thought he had a problem with his morals. Eventually, he chose to voluntarily resign. There was no farewell party for him. After leaving the company, he immediately started working toward finding a new job. But he had a hard time finding another job. He would always be turned down for the final interview. As he became more involved in fishing to heal his broken heart, he was left further behind by those around him. After my divorce from him, I rented an apartment and lived with my daughter. Taking care of her is not that hard. She's a very sweet and good girl, and since I was originally the only one taking care of her when my ex-husband was around, nothing has changed. She is now in the 1st grade of elementary school. I may be laughed at for being a foolish parent, but she has grown up to be a very clever and sweet girl. It's hard to believe she's the child of such a cold, self-absorbed man. Just the other day, my daughter and I were on our way home from shopping. For the first time in several years, my ex-husband appeared in front of us. Hi, Maddie, Sophie, you guys are looking well. The ex-husband, whom I had not seen in a long time, was a shadow of his former self. His shabby clothes were obviously dirty. His hair and beard were growing as long as they could. His whole body gave off the vibe that he had not eaten properly for the past few days. At that time, I am sure he came to ask me for money. He must have been so cornered. He came to bow to me in shame. That was when he was about to say something. Sophie took one of the loaves of bread she just bought out of the bag and offered it to him. Sophie, is this... My daughter remained silent and gave a small nod. He said, "Thank you," accepted the bread, and turned his back. I'm sure he was too pathetic to say anything. He was crying as he walked away. Since then, I have not seen my ex-husband. A mutual acquaintance, whom I see occasionally, told me about what happened to my ex-husband. Apparently, he got kicked out of the apartment he was living in because he could no longer pay the rent. He's been living in parks and back alleys ever since. He lives with other people who are also homeless, helping each other and sharing information. We're not sure if he is still fishing. A few more years later, I met a wonderful man through a friend. Perhaps because he had also been through a divorce, he was very approachable, and I felt very comfortable talking to him. Moreover, he's quite child-friendly. Every time I invite him to our house, he has a great time playing card games with my daughter. His smile at such times is so charming, and my daughter and I love him that way. If he were to propose to me, I would be happy to accept it. I talked to my daughter about it, and she said if I were to marry him, she would be all for it. I failed in my first marriage, but life is far from over. I would like to build a happy family with him and my daughter. That's what I'm hoping for now.